Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and my name is Tony Humphreys. I work at the European Medicines Agency and I head up a task force on regulatory science and innovation. And it's a pleasure for me to welcome you to this EMA session on the focus on availability and access of medicines and how we're gearing up to the challenges as a system in Europe. And it's a great pleasure to be here. Certainly for me personally, it's a first at the European Health Forum Gastein, and we have a lovely venue, a beautiful day, and a very informed audience. And let's hope then over the next hour or so then we're going to get through and have a good exchange and discussion on this issue. In order to help me discuss and debate this issue with you, I'll be joined by an esteemed group of panelists who I'll introduce to you shortly. But I just want to highlight that I'm also grateful for the support of a young Gasteiner, Lena Lorentzen, who will help us then monitoring the various Slido for your various comments and questions that'll be open pretty much throughout the session. For the online audience, polls, comments and questions can be submitted on Slido, and you see that next to the stream in the conference platform. And then for those in the room, lucky enough to be here physically in the room, you can also go to slido.com, and I'm told that the keyword is WAVE. I don't know if that's still correct, colleagues, or else indeed it is up on the screen, or you can take it off the QR code. Okay. So with that being said, what we thought would be good to kick off the session would be if I sort of give a little sort of warm-up, what's the approach with regards to the AAA challenge in a nutshell. So if you can bear with me over the next few minutes, that's what I'll hope to do with this short presentation. Okay. Okay, this is essentially the problem statement that the Commission have sort of enunciated that supported then the pharmaceutical review. Essentially, and I think we're all familiar with this, that medicines authorized in the EU are still not reaching patients quickly enough and are not equally accessible in all member states. So this is the inequality challenge that has been discussed very extensively in a lot of the plenary sessions yesterday. There are significant gaps in addressing these unmet medical needs, both rare diseases and non-rare diseases, as well as the particular challenge of antimicrobial resistance, which needs a specific response. And of course, then we can't escape from the idea that there is high prices for these innovative treatments, some of which are eye-watering with some of these advanced technologies that are coming through, and shortages of medicines remain, and not even remain, continue to be and are increasingly an important concern for patients and healthcare systems and indeed healthcare professionals as well. And that was exemplified most recently with the sort of antibiotic shortage that we experienced in the last winter season. So that's essentially the sort of challenge statement around this sort of AAA challenge. And if I can go, what I wanted, sorry, it's, there's a slight problem. I don't know if we can go back on the slides, guys. Yeah, essentially what I wanted to sort of say is that this availability challenge is not new in Europe. And what I wanted to sort of highlight here with this graphic is that we've been set up to deal with this or to try to improve the situation really for a generation, if not more. I can start, I mean, it's an EMA sort of perspective. With the launch of the centralized procedure back in '95, it was essentially a single market instrument, leading to one authorization, one labeling, one SPC, one package leaflet, and the idea was that really would facilitate access to all EU citizens at the time to essentially all these innovative products. And that was extended with essentially a mandatory, a sort of monopoly on new active substance innovative therapies in Europe in 2004, and that was with the extension of that centralized procedure. And it was no coincidence that was in parallel with the enlargement of Europe when we went from the existing 15 to the, 28, let's not be particular on the numbers. I wanted to highlight something else because we have a couple of speakers, both Michael Bernstein and also Marcus Guardian, that will be talking about the sort of HTA perspective, or certainly our relationship with that HTA perspective. The Commission was very far-sighted with regards to the launch of this project back in 2005. So we've been trying to, address this availability access challenge ever since, and of course that's maturing further down the timeline. We have existing network strategies, both at the agency and at the European, the network of NCAs in Europe, the national competent authorities, and that really is trying to improve primarily invest in the evidence generation in terms of what's the evidence generation expectation for all of these innovative medicines, and that then should enable the access, availability, and affordability type decisions downstream. We had the pharma strategy landing in November 2020, which is absolutely massive in terms of its ambitious scope, and certainly the review is a key component of that, a flagship proposal in that, but it's by no means the limits of it, and we shouldn't forget that. And we also had, not to be underestimated, the adoption of the HTA regulation in 2021, and then that kicking into force with regards to these joint sort of clinical assessments for ATMP's oncology products, Michael, starting in January 25. And then finally we have the publication of the EC Pharma Review itself. So really, guys, I could have started with the review, which I'll do in the next slide, but I think it's important to remind ourselves, you know, this isn't a new challenge, and we've been trying as a European system to deal with it in one way or another for the last 25 years, and we will be dealing with it for the next 25 years as well. Okay. So end of April, we were all, you know, it was a bit of a mystery as to exactly when it was going to get published, but it came out end of April. We had the reform of the EU pharma's legislation. And I know Stella Kyriakides was addressing the plenary sessions yesterday afternoon and talking about how we're forging ahead on the European Health Union. But look at what was said there. And I think these are very indicative as to what the ambition level is. We present a once-in-a-generation proposal to ensure medicines are accessible, available, and affordable, the AAA, at all times for European citizens, no matter where they live. A single market for medicines, delivering for citizens, and keeping our industry as a global leader. And that's the challenge, guys, in terms of how to achieve that balance. But certainly that is the joint ambition with the pharma review, and as I say, even the pharmaceutical strategy more broadly. And then if I look at the Vice President's comments there on the right, and in particular, an EU health union with no first and second class citizens. So again, the inequality sort of concern, no member state left behind. And look at the bottom there on the picture, putting patients at the center. Yeah, and we'll come more on that then in terms of, so that's what dropped end of April, and everyone was really interested to sort of get their heads around it in terms of what its real implications were with this AAA challenge. And essentially, in a nutshell, these are the basic elements of what we're going to try to do as a system then over the next, assuming the legislation gets adopted. So the first of those is new incentives will encourage companies to make their medicines available to patients in all EU countries and develop products that address unmet medical need. So there's a two-pronged element in that. First of all is that sort of access across the 27, which by no means is the case today. And the second is a sort of nudging of the development industry to develop, you know, unmet medical needs in whatever form they are actually then described by us as a society. Earlier availability of generic and biosimilar medicines will be facilitated and market authorization procedures simplified. So this is the balancing sort of competition between the innovator industry and the follow-on industry, be it classical generics and or increasingly biosimilars. Measures for greater transparency of public funding of medicines development will be introduced, because there's an awful lot of, one of the great things we have in Europe is programs like the Horizon Europe, you know, the various flagship fundings from there. Generation of comparative clinical data will be incentivized, and that's very important because sometimes, you know, trying to put a value assessment on any of this innovation that's emerging, you have to then, you know, refer to whatever is the standard of care that it's sort of coming into in any given therapeutic type situation. So that's where the emphasis on this comparative clinical data and the idea of incentivizing that comes from. And then finally, not in the legislation itself, but as a sort of soft measure, support for information exchange between the member states, cooperation on pricing, reimbursement, and payment policies. And a lot of the sort of, you know, some of the criticism that you hear, even with some of the pharma proposal, is that, you know, it's a sort of limited in terms of obligations on one part of the system, but not necessarily addressing other elements in the system. And I believe the last element there, of course, does address the sort of member state behavior with regards to pricing, reimbursement, etc. Okay. If I can move on. Yeah. So I just want to drill down on these a little bit more, if you'll allow. And it's very curious because I want to open up a slide of question to get your opinion as to which of these measures do you think are going to be most influential in making a change, moving the needle in the next sort of 5, 10, if not 20 years. So these incentives for innovation, so the benchmark is a rebasing from what was traditional, let's say 10 years down to 8 years of unconditional data protection. So no matter what your development is, you get the 8 years. In addition to that, the idea is even earlier, a faster, more efficient regulatory system to get to that primary approval point. So that's good for patients, good for healthcare professionals. And that then is an enhanced pre-authorization support, a faster authorization system. And then also that counterbalancing with regards to the competitive element with an earlier market entry, both of the generic and the biosimilar medicines. But if you go back to that sort of basic 8 years of unconditional data protection, there is a series of further extensions which then can be described as conditional or modulated. And if I start bottom up on the right hand there, the market launch in the 27 is absolutely a keystone proposal from the Commission because they want to make a difference to what we have seen over the last 25 years. You get extra protection if you address unmet medical need, and in the case of orphans, so-called high unmet medical need, and then that's very interesting with regards to how we define that and indeed who defines that. I've already explained the fact, the ambition to get the comparative clinical trial data sets into the table, and also then if you expand the use of the product in its early development phase into additional indications, you can then top up that basic 8 years of protection. So that's essentially, in a very simplistic form, the incentives for innovation and the balancing competition then with the generics and biosimilars. If I go on to the next, yeah. Just a quick word on antimicrobial resistance. We all know it's one of the top 3 health threats in Europe, and as well as all the measures on prudent use, and that's happened a lot in the veterinary sort of area, but increasingly has to happen in the human area as well. This proposal of transferable vouchers is being proposed by the Commission. Personally, I think it's an incredibly brave proposal because it's trying to make a significant change to actually have, you know, up to 10 novel antibiotics produced in the next 10 to 15 years, and these transferable vouchers potentially then would be an incentive for one or more developers to achieve that. And I know indeed there was a session yesterday, I think, on the CARB-X consortium trying to address that AMR, so we can make a bridge to that as well. But certainly, if we stay as we currently are, it's not that we're going to be faced with a avalanche of new antimicrobial products in the pipeline if we don't do anything, and therefore this is the significant proposal from the Commission in this area, whatever you make of it. Okay. Yeah. On the availability, and you'll be glad to hear I'm coming towards the end of this quick intro, and this is, we already mentioned shortages of supply, and in a sense this is at both ends of the spectrum, and if anything it's more of an issue with regards to the high volume essential medicines. That's the absolute bedrock of every health system, not just in Europe but in the world, and we've seen real problems emerge increasingly, particularly with the global supply chain challenges over the year. So this is the sort of basic pitch that's in the review. New requirements for monitoring of shortages of medicines by national authorities, and EMA having a stronger coordination role. And that's essentially building on, we already have an extended mandate on the back of the COVID for pandemic and major event crisis in a sense, but the idea that we get more involved even in providing a support platform in day-to-day sort of normal times management, if we can describe these times as normal. Strengthened obligations on companies with regards to reporting of the shortages, withdrawal of the medicine so that the system can react, and also development of shortage prevention plans. So we really need to have an insight into how these companies are structuring their obligations to, once you have an authorization, how do you fulfill your obligation to fulfill the market demand? The establishment of an EU-wide list of critical medicines And once established, then the idea of assessment of supply chain vulnerabilities, mitigating measures taken by the supply chain stakeholders. And we're not actually waiting for this legislation to land to do that. There is work going on at the moment to establish the EU critical list of medicines, and that's very much supported by the Commissioner. And then finally, in the new legislation, legally binding measures the Commission can take to strengthen that security of supply. Now, nobody pretends that this is a magic solution, and with all of these things, even when they're implemented, we're not going to have any more problems of shortages. But again, it's just saying it's a serious problem, it's a serious concern, and we believe that these steps, particularly the third one, with regards to having identified something as critical, how do you assess and how do you shore up those supply chain vulnerabilities? So that's all then into the future. And with that being said then, I think before, I just want to check what the next slide is. Is it introducing the panels or not? I'm just wondering, Lena, can we go to the Slido poll for the audience if we bring up the first Slido question? And yeah, so this is the first one, guys, if you want to have a crack at this. So based on what you've heard from me, in your opinion, which of the key proposals from the review will most address the AAA challenge within the next 10 years? I mean, that's an arbitrary time. And again, just going over the ones we've sort of given to you in terms of the options, the new incentives, the modulated, the unmet medical needs, the launch in all countries, the earlier availability of generics biosimilars, the measures for the greater transparency, the comparative clinical trial data, and the support for the information exchange. So in a sense, we're looking for a sort of vote as to what you think is most influential. And if we allow a few moments for that to fill in, and I'll be guided by Lena as to how good or bad that is in terms of the speed. And what I would then propose to do is that introducing the panelists, who I'll invite to give a sort of opening impulse statement on the AAA challenge, we leave that question open, and you're able to change your voting system depending on what you hear from the panelists, and we'll have a look at what that projection is at the end of their interventions. So that's basically the idea that we had. So I don't know, Lena or Julia, if you can advise me when is a good time to have a look at the emerging poll, I hope. Yeah, okay then, very good. Fair enough then. So we have generics and biosimilar medicines in pole position, in a manner of speaking. Yes, no, just topped by new incentives. So it's really sort of neck and neck, I would suggest. Information exchange on the pricing and reimbursement, and then to a lesser extent then the clinical data and the transparency of funding. Yeah, I won't say now whether or not I find that personally surprising or not, but let's see how that goes. And colleagues, we'll leave it open. They tell me technologically, which I'm not, it's possible, and we'll have a look at this after you hear from our esteemed panelists. But at the moment, then we essentially have the new incentives with the market launch, the unmet needs, and then closely followed then thereafter then by the generics and biosimilars. So if I can introduce just briefly my panelists, and I'll invite them to sort of take the floor as I describe them, who they are. And if I start then with Anika Tibel, then from the Karolinski University Hospital, if I can ask Anika to take the floor. She's a Director of Research, Development, Education and Innovation in the Karolinski University Hospital. So to some extent then she represents both a hands-on active healthcare professional, but also very strong academic researcher. And obviously Anika is going to be very interesting to hear your perspective on the AAA challenge. And then if I can invite Virginie Hiver from Eurodis to also join the panel. And obviously Virginie has massive experience in the sort of patient perspective, rare disease type community. She's been very active in our system, both with roles on our Orphan Medicines Committee, our Pharmacovigilance Committee, I believe even now our Management Committee. So in fact, she's now my boss, so I need to be very careful with her. And she also has hands-on research project experience. So it's not just talking about demand, it's actually getting down into the rolling up the sleeves and getting involved with real projects. If I then ask a representative of the development community, because if the healthcare professionals and the patients are the demand, the unmet medical need, who are the guys trying to fill in that gap? So I invite Michael Zayek then to the stage. And Michael has, his background is in surgical oncology, and because he wanted to do more for cancer patients in terms of developing options, it motivated him to go into clinical research and development, and he has a rather vast experience in that area. And he's been telling me that he is passionate, Michael, both by science and people. I don't know in which order, but maybe the intersection between the two. Let's hope that's the case. If I also introduce my own colleague, Michael Bernton from the EMA, he heads up a division in the agency called the Scientific Evidence Generation Department, and he essentially represents the regulatory side of things. But Michael has spent an awful lot of his career trying to overcome what we describe as the Darwinian divide between regulators and risk-benefit regulators and HTA payer-type communities, and he really has invested in a lot in that, and you'll hear about that as and when he intervenes. And online, then, I'm very happy, we have Marcus Garjim. He's Chief Operating Officer for UNETA, or at least has been for a large number of years. He very much has been instrumental in Europe on bringing together a network of HTA cooperation and believing in a sustainable HTA cooperative system. And of course, we're just on the point of the delivery on that with regards to the HTA regulation as they gear up for true implementation January 25 and beyond. Okay, so dear colleagues, I hope that's been a good warm-up for you. You sort of get what's on the table in terms of the proposal on the AAA challenge, and now it's you get a break from me, and I hand over to my panelist colleagues, and I'll kick off then with to give their perspective on the challenge. And if I start left to right, or as you view them on the stage left and right, Anika, please, if you can present your statement. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to do so, but I think the microphone... Do you hear me at the back?
It's beside you, yeah.
Thank you. And it's on?
It's on.
Good. Well, Tony, thank you so much. I will connect to your first nutshell slide. And I think that in addressing unmet medical needs, we need to put even more emphasis on what happens in academia, and also what happens in the basic research part of academia, because in many grants you have to describe what is the patient benefit. Patient benefit is extremely important, but if we only go for things where we know there is a patient benefit, we will not find the unexpected. We need curiosity-driven research to find the unexpected solutions. Within Horizon Europe, I'm sitting in the Science and Innovation panel in the Innovative Health Initiative, and there is a possibility, I don't know if everyone knows that, to submit ideas on future focus areas for this huge initiative that is promoting collaboration between academia and industry. And during the first year, we got some 20 ideas submitted, and anyone can submit an idea. And of these, 7 have gone on further in the process. So I think it's worthwhile thinking about that. If you have a great idea, try to get it supported. Okay, unequal access to medicine. Yeah, that is a problem, but the problem is cannot be addressed in isolation, because we have unequal access to care. And the right medicine has to meet the right patient that has been evaluated in the right way. And we all know that there are waiting lists, there are differences in level of expertise in infrastructure, in access to precision medicine. And precision medicine is going to salami slice some of our patient groups. So what we just discussed, we will have many more rare diseases in the future, much more demand for individualized treatments. And then we automatically get into ATMP, where we see a great interest in, at least in our university hospitals in Northern Europe. And I think we talk about ATMP. ATMP is important, but we have to remember so far rather few patients. And I was so happy, Tony, on the emphasis you put on the kind of more basic, not so exciting drugs, the drugs we've taken for granted, and that all of a sudden are not there. And I think as a physician, you need to understand, I'm a transplant surgeon by training, how much of worries that creates in a patient when you're not sure you're going to get your drugs. I was the chief medical medical officer commissioning 330,000 square meters of a new Karolinska hospital. And then I learned to hate just-in-time delivery. Just-in-time delivery, I'm sure it's commercially beneficial. It's sure good for cars, but in medicine, where we have an absolute demand that can vary all of a sudden because of a disaster catastrophe, I think we really need to get, the pendulum has gone too far. And I don't think we can expect from the commercial industry to change that. I think it's, of course we can do good contracts and so, but it is a societal responsibility, I think. And we need to move the pendulum back a little bit to really secure the access of drugs. When I went to the airport, I heard an advertisement on Swedish radio that I've never heard before. That was from the Board of Health and Welfare. And it advised all patients with chronic conditions to secure themselves that they had at least 1 month of drug supply at home. That is a very new statement. Usually you could go to the pharmacy to get what you needed. I hope we can get away from having to ask our patients to do the storage for us, and that the storage is done at other phases of the delivery chain. Thank you.
Yes. Please, yeah, thank you very much. Anika, I pass on now to Virginie. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. So I will take a slightly different perspective than my colleague, but going into the kind of same direction still. I wanted to start this statement by giving you a bit of the perspective from the rare disease on how we do read those 3 A's and the challenges that are linked to that. So at Organised, we represent the 30 million of people living with rare disease in Europe. And when we start with availability, of course, we have concern, like you described, about the shortages issues. That's something that is transversal and concerning everyone. But I have to say that the other things that come to mind immediately is really the absence of treatment. So it's not even availability, it's just that we have 1/3 of our community, of our population, who doesn't have access to treatment just because they don't exist. So it's also a matter of lack of development. And then it goes on. We also have patients that couldn't access their treatment because it wasn't accessible in their country. So there is this idea of inequity in Europe, which we cannot support. And there is also the problem of affordability. So also we have 12% of the patients who could have a treatment who couldn't afford it. So this is how we read those 3 A's. And in order to remedy to that, one of the strategic objectives that Organised has fixed to itself is to help or to advocate for the development of 1,000 new medicine available, affordable, and accessible for meeting the needs of the patients living with rare disease by the Horizon 2030. So how we envisage that this could be improved and that this goal can be reached. For the purpose of this session, I only wanted to highlight 2 key points. And the first one actually is the early dialogue. So I will go a bit more into details into that. And the second point is the cooperation between member states. And again, I will also tell you a bit more. So to start with the early dialogue, what we see in the benefit of early dialogue between companies and regulators and HTA and payers, that's first of all the shared understanding. So how each of the parties understand each other, how we do identify what is exactly the unmet needs. And also, how do we prepare so that the development is really on the right track since the beginning? So basically, the idea is the evidence that you mentioned, Tony, is how do we make sure that even in the pre-marketing phase, the company is able to discuss with the regulator and other parties what are the data that needs to be collected to meet the need at each stage. So for marketing authorization, but also after. It's not a good idea to wait until after the marketing authorization to figure out that you are missing data for the payers or the HTA assessment. So here, to come back also on the strategy of the EMA has a good record of experience with early dialogue, and one particular point that I wanted to highlight is the PRIME scheme, which we are very happy to see now written in the legislation. It has been beneficial for the rare diseases. I think in terms of number, 46% of the product entering the PRIME scheme were for rare disease, and up to 90%, I think, of the marketing authorization were for rare disease. So that's really something that is really valid for us. So now I come to the second point, the cooperation with the member states or between the member states. And here the EMA has more than 25 years experience with the collaboration with the network of agencies all over Europe. For us, we see like in this collaboration between member states as very crucial, in particular when we are talking about ultra-rare diseases, low prevalences, very few knowledge about those diseases. It means that the expertise is really scarce and it's scattered around Europe, so there is really this idea that cooperation can be beneficial, and there is the same for the new product, the very complex product, and you mentioned ATMPs. The technologies are evolving very rapidly, so there is really this idea that if we want to assess at best those new medicine for very unknown diseases and often also very pricey medicines, we need this cooperation. And well, I mentioned that in terms of cooperation between member states, we have the experience of the EMA that can be shared. We have now the new HTA legislation that Tony introduced. And we also have experience now, more than 10 years of experience with the payers. So that is the MOCA initiative that I wanted also to mention as the second initiative. MOCA stands for Mechanism of Mechanism of Cooperating Action, and that is an early dialogue between the payers on a voluntary basis, the company, and the patient. So here what is very interesting is that this dialogue happens very early in the process. The company can discuss with a range of payers and discuss about agreeing on endpoints, agreeing on how the new medicine will take its place in the armamentarium of treatment. And the patient is here, of course, to also give the right direction in terms of meeting the unmet needs, and also in terms of bringing the real aspect of living with this disease. And I'm really also going through this MOCA initiative because now we have this 10 years of experience. We have had 23 products going through the scheme. The outcome is really positive in terms of the feeling and the perception of all the parties. It was proven beneficial from the payer side, from the company side, from the patient side, but now we are reaching the point of needing to see a bit further and needing to look at the sustainability of this initiative. And that's where I'm coming back, and I finish on that, on the topic of this panel, is that, of course, EMA can also serve as a convener or sharing lesson learned of this cooperation and this early dialogue, but not everything is on the shoulder of the EMA. There is this need for discussion between the member states. There is a new initiative from the WHO, the Novel Medicine Platform, where these topics will be discussed, and we really see an alignment between all those discussions, all those schemes. So if you take PRIME, if you take the EMA payers meetings that are already happening, if you take the lesson learned from MOCA, then you can imagine all these chains of early dialogue cooperation in order to bring more therapies for rare disease patients. So I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Virginie. That's very good. Now, I hand over to Michael from the sort of development industry. You've heard the sort of demand sort of expression. So what's the solution?
I can try to respond.
I heard 1,000 new medicines. Virginie doesn't need much. Like, it took us 25 years to get 1,000. You want 1,000 by 2030. So something's got to give,
We on average in a big organization launch 2 or 3 a year. So it'll take us a while. My view on availability, and it's just my view, I'm not representing anybody. I'm in industry, but I'm also having an academic assignment at King's College, and I'm also grateful to be with EMA and EORTC, part of the Cancer Medicine Forum, which I'll come back to later. So I think on general availability of medicines, I've experienced it myself. I have 2 little nieces and nephews, and in a country like Switzerland, I couldn't get them painkillers for fever last winter. So it's the harsh reality. And I think what we see here in the new legislation is the regulatory part, is the stick, and to away the administration, which I think has to be welcome. Of course, it doesn't then generate more medicines. I think countries like Germany then have taken on other initiatives like pricing corridors, like making sure that pediatric medicines receive different prices, like producers can have, depending where they produce, have different revenues. I think that is more the carrot. And I'm a believer, look, if you have children, you manage them by guidance maybe until they're 10, and afterwards you manage them by incentive. And I think incentive is always the more powerful argument. So I think that will eventually work. At least I hope that we don't have shortage of essential medicines in the coming winters to go. But we have to acknowledge it was there, and it probably is there. And I think what you guys do is probably a step in the right direction. I think on antimicrobial resistance, the probable solution would be to try to price these medicines properly. That's very difficult for an antibiotic today, because of course the comparator price in the market is pitifully low for someone to develop a new medicine. Hence, the belief, or this my personal belief, is that this AMR voucher is not a perfect solution, but of course, it's a step in the right direction to encourage development. And I guess we have to see over the years, when this regulation comes into place, how it works. In the end, numbers will speak for themselves. On access, I mean, and we will hear later about it. In the end, we worked with UNETA for a while, and the experience for us for the new access regulation is, of course, that it places a lot of emphasis and a lot of early investment at risk in the industry. We have to resource the production of dossiers. For me personally, my team means I probably have to hire 10–20% more people just to have those dossiers ready earlier at a significant risk. Whether it will then lead to faster access, I think we have to see. I mean, the feeling of UNETA was somewhat mixed. I mean, we did get UNETA reimbursement or UNETA recommendations, but it still took in excess of a year to get access in member countries, and this is a published case. So there is nothing new to this. But I think overall we have to change the way we think about medicines. I think medicines will increasingly be developed for you and for me, and not for populations, which means we have completely different level of evidence. And in a way, I mean, Tony, you mentioned it, and sorry to say it, the classic comparative clinical trial might be a thing of the past, because it cannot necessarily be done, because you are different to me. So we need to find different approaches, which will be different level of evidence. And to be honest, we always really, with the regulator, we had a very open dialogue, and I think these things moved. Where it often gets stuck is at the payer level. And I hate to say it, it doesn't help us if you guys approve it for use, and that comes back to the incentive to launch it in the countries. When we develop a medicine, we develop it for the whole of the world. We are not particular. We want to make it available everywhere. It's not that we go and say, oh, we're not going to launch it here. This is not our approach. We want to make it available to all patients. But of course, we are an industry with a going concern. We have to generate revenues. So I'm less certain whether what is in the legislation will in any way incentivize us. So last but not least, on affordability, I think you, in a way, you give us the stick by reducing the regulatory protection certificate, which are relevant for probably less than 1/3 of the pharma market, because many other medicines rely on their patent rather than the regulatory protection. And we get something back as the carrot, which is driven by unmet medical need, which I really welcome as a person. I think it's really good. But it does require, as Virginie also said, a really good dialogue with patients. Just a simple example, we develop medicines for psoriasis, and we measure, and we all agree, the measurement is clearing the skin. However, if you are a patient with psoriasis, and I hope you're not, but if you are, then you know what bothers you is not your blotch on the skin. It is your itching of the skin, which stops you from sleeping. So is that then a high unmet medical need? We really need to bring patients in early to determine that well, because otherwise I think we will not help development, but rather stifle it. And I think we need to come to new concepts. So if you intend to take away time on the market, you increase our risk, which doesn't help the affordability, because we are a risk-driven industry. And in Europe, the risk return is probably more than fair. The problem is, as a global industry, you can challenge us, but in Europe, you probably cannot, given our success rates. So then we have to come to new phases of development, and there I come back to the Cancer Medicines Forum. That's something we look. How can we, in public-private partnership, have a phase where we improve the launch drugs? And I think that's something we have to come to terms with. But also, how do we have the payers align to give us early access based on what is deemed to be less evident than a randomized controlled clinical trial with a 5-year follow-up? Because that, in the new legislation, I feel is rather discouraged than encouraged. Yeah, and I think that's sort of the statement. And any kind of funds, I think we say we should really invest into early development, much as Annika says, into sort of unplanned research. I love this book from, I think it's Tim Hartford. He says it's called Messy. I'm not a friend of business books, but this is good because it resonates in a sense. Innovation comes from chaos. You need to have chaos. You don't need to have direction if you really want to have something really novel. So I love regulations. I'm also a surgeon, so I love rules, but there needs to be also some freedom.
On that happy note, then I'll pass over to Michael. Then, thank you very much, Michael. Yeah.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everybody. It's really, I should say, a delight to be here in Gastein, first time in person, and I like the vibe here. That's fantastic. Now, the AAA challenge, which was put together by Tony in a very succinct form, I should say. There's so many facets we can discuss. So let me just pick something now from this earlier presentation, and that's really nicely building also on what Virginie, Annika, and also Michael was saying around this transition from a regulatory approval towards an access decision. And I believe also that builds a nice bridge to Marcus later. Because we have a couple of things here in our strategies, which Tony also referred to as the regulatory science strategy and the European Medicines Agency's network strategy on accessibility and on availability, where we have a couple of recommendations and goals being formulated. And I think the underlying strapline here is really always that there is you could say, a complex ecosystem of decision makers from the actual medicine in terms of its development down towards patient access. And when it comes to decision makers, it's of course the regulators, it's the health technology assessment bodies. They are basically doing the relative effectiveness assessment, comparing to other medicines in this, or therapies in this armamentarium. Then it comes to pricing, reimbursement. Then it comes to clinicians to decide which medicine to take. So it is actually quite a complex chain, you could argue, and you need to connect the dots here. You need to connect these decisions, because all of them, they have their specific remit. All of them have their specific purpose. All of them, because of their remit, they have their specific methodologies. But they should also rest on evidence which can answer their questions. And they have normally one single set of evidence in front of them, where they need to then take the respective information from and allow these decisions to happen. So let me take two concrete examples in my short introduction here. And it was already referred to by Virginie earlier. In order to support the development of medicines that address an unmet medical need, the agency had launched some years ago the Priority Medicines Scheme, called PRIME, really to support development in these areas specifically. Additional love, if you will, in a sense of you give more support in terms of the discussion you are allowing, the opportunities you're having to engage, but also now to see prior to filing, so prior to submitting your marketing authorization, are you ready to file? So these discussions are extremely important. And in this context, we've done a 5-year review. The 5-year review, which we published back in 2021, had a couple of recommendations also. What we've shown is that there was a reduction of the time to marketing authorization, a higher success rate, and a broad range of medical needs were covered. That's all good. So if I summarize this, I would say increased robustness, increased timeliness, increased predictability. These are really, really important points from this learning. So far, so good. But then how about translating this into the next decision-making in terms of down towards access? Because I said it's a consequential one. There are several studies, and just let me refer to the one from CEARS, the Center for Innovation and Regulatory Science. They do regular reports about the uptake in HTA decisions in different contexts in Europe, and they had done a review with data from France, Germany, Netherlands, Poland, and Sweden, and they concluded there's a heterogeneous perception regarding the value of prime products across the HTA agencies. So in a way, they have looked at the evidence and came to their particular conclusion. And also, when we looked at the data from our 5-year review and we asked developers were saying we need to have more interactions prior to, during the development, also with the other decision makers like HTA bodies to shape our development programs. So all of this really comes together to a message, again, similar to what also Virginie was referring to, this closer engagement around the evidence, because this is really what connects all these decisions. Now, the second example, briefly rehearsed here, is what we've done over the past years, and Tony was mentioning in his introductory remarks. We have been working with the colleagues from UNETA, the European Network for Health Technology Assessment, since 2010. And one of the areas here is that we had established a way to provide parallel scientific advice. So scientific advice, prospective discussion on an evidence generation program with the perspectives of regulators and health technology assessment bodies in the room. And we have learned a lot procedurally, but leave this one aside for the moment. We've learned also a lot in terms of how one can optimize, on developer's side, a development program if you hear these different perspectives earlier. There have been loads of convergence very early on the patient population to be studied, one of the elements in the PICO. There have been the least convergence, if you would, on the comparator, only 30%. There was 30% was the highest degree of divergence here in this study. But one could overcome this with pre-planning of indirect comparison, with pre-planning of 3-arm trials or something else. So it could be overcome by design. And that's something which we always need to embrace. We mustn't just find ourselves in front of the evidence and then make a decision. We need to work and plan towards getting the evidence right that allows a decision to be made. And that's really the key learning from all these years. Exactly 2 weeks ago, on the 14th of September, EMA and UNETA had their concluding 25th bilateral, because UNETA is now closed. We published about it, we published a joint report about it. Have a read if you wish. We looked back at our experience, but also progressed what are the topics moving forward. And I think there's a lot we need to do in the context of the now in implementation being HTA regulation, which is a groundbreaking piece of legislation because it really allows a very new way of working in many ways, maybe disruptive in some regards as well, you could say, but also really connecting and recognizing, for example, the value of regulatory HTA interface collaboration that we have been worked on a project level since 2010. So that brings me really back also to the point from Tony when he was going through all the different remedies in the pharma package. And there was one point around the comparator, and I just have to pick this up now because you just mentioned it, Michael, because there is this incentive here proposed, and I believe here one needs to have really in-depth discussion, which are not for today, but one needs to have in-depth discussion also. What's the purpose of a comparator in a clinical trial? And is the clinical trial responding to the scientific question in the context of a benefit-risk decision-making to then allow you to make the right assumption and assessment? Or is it to address policy questions which are necessary in the healthcare system to address the added value a new technology will be having? And these are different questions, and they're asked by different decision makers. And that already explains to you a bit the complexity of even coming to these points. So with this all being said, and I see here, please wrap up. It's on the screen, sorry. It's really important to recognize this need to connect the various decision makers, because medical innovation only matters if it reaches the patients. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael, for that excellent wrapping up in the last 60 seconds. And Marcus, you've got the, by no means last, but you've got the challenge of responding to the needs expressed, to the development industry concerns with regards to the carrot and stick, Michael's own sort of perspective on risk-benefit, but also the bridge then to the HTA community. So hopefully you'll be able to give us a sort of ultimate wrap-up to this panel expression, and then we'll throw it open to the floor. So over to you then, please, Marcus.
Yes, so thank you very much for having me. My apologies, I can't be there in person. Such a missed opportunity for me, but apparently I'm viral, so I didn't want you exposed to that. Michael, thank you so much for giving an introduction to UNETA, such brilliantly formulated, especially when it comes to the collaboration with the EMA, which we cherish very much. So I'll try to be very brief. I have a timer running which says 3 minutes, and now already much less, so I'll be quick. When it comes to the AAA, which I think is a fantastic approach and also a brilliant piece of marketing from the colleagues at the Commission, I really want to stress a few things, and especially sort of in light of what has been discussed here today in the panel. First of all, I know that this specific session of today is focusing on availability and access, but it's a AAA, so we cannot forget affordability. And for me, it's really important to ensure that we all know that this is a finite resource, and we need to come to a system that allows us to take hard decisions on finite resources, and how do we ensure that those finite resources are used to the best possible means for our population. So this is something where I hope that in a future version of the pharma legislation, there's more interlope and loop back to the regulatory realm, where we maybe can create space to sort of conceptualize that more. I think that is really a missed opportunity here, and we are fully aware and recognize and acknowledge the limitations, which are there for a reason in the regulatory side, to not talk about prices and all these important elements, but we sort of need to reflect more on that. That I think for us is really important. And of course, if we think about affordability, which has many complex elements, one of them, if you think it through, and I guess this is also maybe the right forum to talk about it, eventually it leads to a thought process where you come to a situation where joint procurement might be something that you want to consider. And we see in the mandates that have been given to the EMA under this new piece of legislation and others, and also to the colleagues at HERA, that include already elements of procurement. Joint procurement on EU level in whatever means and done by whatever entity needs to ensure that it has included HTA, proper EU level HTA processes. And we really hope that this will be much further strengthened in a future version of that piece of legislation and others, so that this will be included. I think and thank you for mentioning it before, Michael. There is a lot more opportunity in that legislation to be built on, including the voices of the HTA community, of payers, of patients, especially when it comes to definitions, especially when it comes to looking more closely at the elements of that legislation and how are these used, comparators, unmet need. These are key elements that should be defined by those who use it or need it most, and it should be a joint exercise and not only driven by one party in the process. And fundamentally important, and mentioned before, but I cannot stress this enough, joint scientific consultations parallel between regulatory and HTA bodies is the key to a successful future when it comes to new products, innovative products in the market that provide the right evidence base, that get fastest possible access, and are in a scheme that ensures that they are affordable in the future. So I can only urge Parliament, Council, and Commission to very carefully review all pieces of legislation to support that process, the parallel joint scientific consultations, as much as possible, be it resource-wise, be it structurally, be it in new pieces of legislation. This must be the focus in the next coming years, because this lays the foundation for everything that comes after. I'm a bit over time, but I hope that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, and certainly, and good luck with your recovery from the virus. Hopefully you're not experiencing any personal shortage with regards to the remedies you may be taking, so good luck with that, and thank you very much for a very succinct intervention. So now, guys, we've got just less than about 20 minutes or so before I think we close the session, so we're into sort of Q&A and feedback from the audience. We did say, I don't know, Lean, if we've left that Slido poll running in terms of what was the most effective. I don't know whether there's been any change based on the panelists' intervention, but in fact, no. Pretty much it's as we saw it at the beginning, which is the combination of the incentives together with the unmet medical need and the launch pattern still being thought to be the most influential one, closely followed then thereafter by the mechanisms to facilitate generic and biosimilars. Okay, so we do have one or two other Slido questions to throw out, but I think, Lena, and just to be fair to the people online, is there a sort of most popular question that's been supported by colleagues that you think would be good for one or more of the panelists to address?
Thanks so much, Tony. There are quite a few questions on the new pharma strategy and the new legislation. So one of them, in terms of the pharma strategy, is whether it opens up a path for appropriate subsidies of innovative products in all EU countries, not allowing tricks for companies and impeding catastrophic prices at pharmacies, which I think you touched a bit upon already. And then also, if the EU pharma legislation addresses some of the new challenges in the industry, such as digital health and AI solutions, and also if it has an impact on non-EU members, i.e. candidates for ascensions. Then there's a backward-looking question which might be relevant also in terms of the experience from the COVID vaccine development and procurement for changing the relationship with pharmaceutical companies and design of incentives, whether that has some relevance as well. But yeah, quite a lot of action online.
Okay, no, thank you. I don't know, colleagues, if you want to take maybe Lynn, if you repeat the first one of those then, which was to do, we'll have a crack at that
Absolutely. Will the new pharma strategy open up the path for appropriate subsidizes of innovative products in all EU countries, not allowing tricks for companies and impeding catastrophic prices at pharmacies?
Yeah. Okay. Anyone? Michael, I give it to Michael Bernton to address that one first of all, yeah, because that's no direct subsidies that I'm aware of, though.
No, I think fair to say no direct subsidies, because that's not in the context of a pharmaceutical legislation as such, but it does open certainly for some incentives, in particular the one around the launch pattern, which intends exactly also to facilitate that these pricing negotiations are coming to a close. And of course then here there is an element where then the member states in their decision-making power have absolutely the opportunity to make these negotiations coming to something which is acceptable, put it this way. But can I also just briefly coming to the second one, because I was really intrigued by the second question which you referred, Lena, and that was about the link to the digital health technologies and AI, etc. And I think this is a very important question, very important space where the recognition of innovative healthcare, in a way it's been developed nowadays with a combination of medicinal products, medical devices, diagnostics and digital health technologies really needs better linking. And there is currently also some complexity in Europe, which is to some degree only high level, I would say, addressed in this package, but I can imagine will also be subsequently discussed more, because it is currently quite challenging.
Can I invite a question from the floor, colleagues? Yeah, because again, I just wanted to go to the online because they're easy not to sort of forget compared to the people in front of you. I don't know if there's anybody from the floor who wants to. Please, Richard. Yeah. I need a mic. It's roving there. Oh.
Yeah, so Richard Bergström, I'm from IQVIA. I have a question, but I will do something unusual now by actually answering a question from online, because I was one of the negotiators for the COVID-19 vaccines for the EU, together with Christina, who's somewhere here in the room. I do indeed believe, as Marcus was alluding to, that I think the industry is maybe a bit too afraid of joint procurement. I'm not sure technically that's maybe the best instrument, but what we did with the vaccines showed to the industry that actually the governments, member states are willing to pay. And actually, at least 2 companies, they made a lot of money. And I said, I think it's a good signaling to the private sector that next time around, you can make money if you mobilize. So I think it's actually a good thing. Now, coming to my question, so we have a session tomorrow, IQVIA, together with the wholesalers on shortages. So we're going to do a deep dive on that with a bit of data as well. But I have a question, because I know, Tony, you have to go back, so you can't be there. So I have a question for you. Or maybe you pass it on to Michael. I don't know how you want to do this. So I think this pharma package, as I call it, I mean, it's 90% is perfect. I mean, old regulatory persons, I know we need to fix things, but there's some elements here which do not reflect maybe understanding of markets, how it works. Michael, you pointed out that the value of regulatory data protection is very limited. It's actually even less than a third. It's probably 18% or something right now. But on shortages, I'm wondering, Tony, that on this risk mitigation plans or shortage avoidance plans or whatever we call it, right? Of course, big pharma or even multi-source producers, they have these plans. It's part of their business. You're asked by your board and investors, how do you make sure that you can supply? Things still happen, okay? Sudden spikes in demand, or factories burn down or something, or tornado. We had this tornado issue in North Carolina. You saw that. A third of all the injectables made in the United States by Pfizer, they were made in a factory hit by a tornado. So these things happen. But when it comes to the multi-source space, we, the member states, have deliberately created very competitive systems where we actually want companies to come in and out. You don't, sign tenders for 5 years. You want, even in Denmark, is every 2 weeks you change which one you're going to use. So who is going to write that plan in a multi-source setting? because these generic companies are not supposed to dominate. They're not supposed to be monopolists to a single source, right? So what is your view on that? I mean, I'm not suggesting that the EMA should do this. It's probably a combination of factors that we will discuss tomorrow on transparency and more foresight, and so on. But what's your view on that? Because it's actually in the legislation now that even generic companies should have these plans. So what's your view from the EMA?
Well, no, I mean, it's honestly, there's no doubt that the complexity of the challenge is magnified once you go for long-established products that are essentially, and with prices that are particularly low, and with, as you say, players moving in and out of the market, because no one single company is actually responsible to supply the total market demand. We saw that in reality with the antibiotic crisis just last Christmas. We had to discuss together with here, actually, we did a lot of negotiations with companies saying, guys, what's your production capacity even for this season coming up, and are you able to increase it? And they say, yes, very interesting, but what's the demand cycle coming from the member states collectively? And it's trying to get those two data sets together, because a company legitimately has a certain production capacity, and if they're in a certain supply type situation, then it's a problem if all of a sudden a tornado reduces that, because then you have a hole and you have to get that filled from another supplier. But for me, the complexity then is actually much more in the established actives and with the multiplicity of players there, as distinct from a primary innovator company who largely wants to supply. You said you make it for the global, you largely want to supply for the global demand. You don't necessarily hear, apart from certain high-profile products in social media that we could debate, that really go off the scale in terms of demand. You don't normally hear those sort of supply issues, certainly with first entrants, let's put it that way, unless the complexity of the production itself, let's say a complex biological, is in itself a limitation. But so there's no doubt that, but the fact that there are more obligations, there's more transparency, there's more understanding, the fact that everybody's reflecting on this is attempting to seek a solution, doesn't discount from the fact that the matching of the supply and demand in a very complex multiple supplier situation and multiple demand situation is incredibly difficult. But I won't go any more than that, because I'm very conscious of our clock now, and we're going to be sort of coming towards the end. And as Richard said, it's a good signpost indeed for the session to follow tomorrow. If I can just ask on the Slido, we did have a couple more questions. One was a confidence level of the audience with regards to the measures that the Commission are proposing. What's your confidence expectation? So I don't know if we can bring that up. And then, but the follow-on on that, guys, because it's all very well to have a level of confidence, we're then going to ask you, okay, guys, what would you do to change in terms of what one thing that might be missing do you think then is going to effective? So this is the question, and what's your confidence level in the overall impact of the reform in the next 10 years? And I think there was, they have a rating scale to fill in. I don't see it on the screen here, but hopefully it's in the Slido option. Yeah, and I don't know. We wait. Yeah. Lena, can you help me with the interpretation as to which way the numbers are arranged, 1 to 5? Which is good, which is bad, yeah?
Yeah, the let me check. The left column is 1, so it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, but in terms of confidence...
1 is 1 star. Yes, there you go. So right now we're on average 2.5.
5 is good.
Yes.
2.6. Yes.
Okay. So we're in the middle then, in a sense, yeah. Okay. And then can we move on, guys? Because prediction is always a tricky game. So we're now asking for the creativity from you. So if we move on to the next question, which I think is what measure or initiative would make your confidence level increase, yeah? And that can either be an existing one already identified, or else, and here I think it's a word cloud setup whereby you put in incentives. Very good. That's the carrot rather than the stick, Michael, yeah? Okay. Transparency on pricing, yeah, okay. Yeah. It's joint actions. Pull incentives, okay, that's the AMR, IP protection, speed and collaboration. Transparency on pricing seems to be strengthening, guys, yeah? And incentives, okay. So any reaction from the panelists to what's emerging here on the word cloud? And we are really broaching the end of the session. I don't know, spontaneous?
I think nothing surprising, and I think we've made a great start to work together. I think we have a number of years, I think, to bring this into legislation, I guess, together as a community of peers, regulators, industry, patients, healthcare providers. So let's do it together, I think.
Okay, very good. Okay, dear colleagues, I think unfortunately the clock in front of me is in the red. I can't believe, I was wondering at the start of this session, like, what was the likely response or the engagement level with regards to the topic. But I mean, the topic is, as I said, it's a multi-generational challenge. We've been working on it as a collective in Europe since '95, and I'm sure if we come back in another 25 years, we'll still be working on it. But let's hope that the Pharma Review really does make a significant impact. It's designed to do that. And certainly, I think the discussion we've just been having now here in this session is very complementary to the sort of broader discussions with regards to health systems, healthcare systems, sustainability in Europe more generally, and indeed it's a global stress post-pandemic. So with that being said, colleagues, I would like to thank very much my esteemed group of panelists, both the colleagues here in the room, and also Marcus, you're an absolute soldier of fortune to sort of manfully sort of join us in the hybrid mode and indeed protect us all from whatever communicable that you may or may not be shedding at the moment. So good luck with that once again. So dear colleagues, if I can ask you then maybe to show your appreciation for the panel in the traditional way, and I wish you a good rest of the session.